So now it's my pleasure to formally introduce our guest today, Dan Mall. Dan is the founder and CEO of SuperFriendly, a design collaborative that brings exquisite creative direction and design to the world's most important and interesting organizations. He's also author of the book Pricing Design, and he also co-founded another company called Superbooked, a service that helps you find work with a little help from your friends. So I'll turn it over to Dan. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lishan. Today's July 14th, so I figured I would share one important tip and then 4 other ones for job seekers. That'll kind of be the format. And then we'll do a little bit of a bonus round afterwards too of some fun stuff, some fun random stuff. The first lesson that I want to share here is about stealing. When I was first learning to design, I would really get frustrated a lot. I just couldn't make anything look original, no matter how hard I tried. And so not only could I not make things look original, but I also just had a hard time making things look good even. And that is until I learned to steal. But not just steal, steal in a specific way. This is my formula for how you make original looking things. It's 3 steps. The first step is to imitate. The second step is to remix. And the third step is to invent. So I want to kind of walk you through an exercise of how to do that in a very simple way. Let's take even my title slide here of this 1 of 5 steps, steal. So how did I even come up with this composition? Well, I'll show you. At SuperFriendly, we did some work with Vox Media about a year ago, and our art director on this was Brian Powell, who is an excellent designer and art director. And these are some of the screens that he came up with. This is one of the concepts that he did for that client. If I zoom in here to one of these, I kind of take a freeze frame here, he has this big number and then kind of a statement here, and then some accompanying text to the right. So I'm like, this actually works as a really good format for, I want to show step 1 of 5 or lesson number 1 of 5. So maybe I could steal this. So if I stole it, the first thing literally when you steal is you just trace. Now, I didn't get the typeface exactly right. I'm not exactly sure what typeface Brian was using, but I've got one that's kind of close enough. And so I traced right over it, made it as close as possible to the original. If we remove that backdrop, we're left with this. And then if we bring it back into our black and white kind of slide background, this is what we get. And now, if I had this and I just put my content in, there's a problem with this. And the problem with this is that literally you can tell that I stole it. If Brian were to look at my composition, he would go, you stole that. And the reason that he can do that is because it's still original, it's still recognizable as the original source. And so the key to stealing is actually remixing, right? Think of how songs are remixed. If you just lift the original song and it sounds like the original song, the artist is going to say, well, you stole that, that's mine, you can't do that. And they would be right. So the key to this is remixing. So how do you do it in a song? Well, you slow down the tempo, or you speed it up, or you modify the pitch, or you add another layer on top, or you loop it, or you cut it up and splice it together in a different way. Essentially, what you do is you can steal from multiple sources. That would be another way to steal. So I didn't just end with this. I didn't just use the same typeface and then replace my content and then I'm done. Instead, I want to try to mix in some other sources. So what else can we mix in? Well, as I was looking across the web, I found this really beautiful set of numerals, and I thought, all right, well, maybe I can use some numbers that are closer to this style. So rather than using the typeface that I have here, which is graphic from commercial type, instead, what I would do is I would try to simulate that letter form or that different style type. Keep your eye on the number 1 here. I'll replace it with a different kind of number 1. So now it's starting to get a little bit farther away from the original source. Now it's still recognizable as the original source, so I need to do some more work here. All right, let's add in another source. So browsing Behance, I come across this really nice composition, and what they're doing here is for all of the numbers lower than 10, they're adding a trailing 0, which is kind of a stylistic thing. So cool, I could do that. Keep your eye on the number 1. I'll add an initial 0 to that. And now again, it's moving away from the original source, still too close, but let's see how we can continue to remix some of this. All right, I look at another source on Behance. Here's a beautiful comp, also done by Brian Powell, the same art director. And you see there in the top right, we've got /19, and then below in the bottom left, we've got /18. And those are ways that they're denoting what number of piece this is. But I have a thing in my content where I want to say this is my step 1 of 5, and the slash motif could actually work really well for that. So if you keep your eye on below the word steal here, I could add very small this /05 to kind of communicate 1 of 5. And if I come back to my original composition here, now I've got something that feels a little bit different than the original source that I stole from, because I stole a little bit from each of the different sources. So now I can start to tighten this up using my graphic design prowess. If I apply a grid to it, you'll see it's not really aligned with anything. So I can kind of move some of these things around to align them a little bit better to my grid. So I've got proportional spacing in how I want to deliver it. And so if I get rid of that grid, it looks kind of like this. Now I can start to modify some of this to go, well, it doesn't really read properly, because it really reads as like, if we read top to bottom, left to right, as we do in America, then we kind of see it's O1, steel, O5. It's not exactly how I want it to be. I want it to read more like this, which is 1 of 5 is steel. And that's where we get our final composition. Our final composition looks kind of like this, and it's from stealing from a couple of different sources. And so one small thing that I'll add to it is, if you look in the bottom row corner, that word steel, I'm using the original typeface still. I'm using the typeface graphic. And instead of that, I could replace it with SuperFriendly's, which is the agency I run, with kind of our brand typeface, which is Fabrica. It's a little bit similar, but it's still farther off. And now I've moved just about everything in this composition away from the originals that I started with, so that it's not really as recognizable as the original source. It is when you know what the sources are, but otherwise it's actually harder to tell. And so if I kind of overlay this on top of all the different sources that I stole from, you'll see that you can see some of the ingredients for where I stole from, but not quite all of them. You get a little bit of each of them, but if you didn't know where these came from, you wouldn't be able to tell that. So the idea here is that you want to steal from all these sources, and that's the first lesson. And this is kind of my formula for how you create original compositions. Now, the trick here is, it's not really my formula. This comes from a book called Steal Like an Artist, where he's sort of recommending this. And this lesson from this book, Steal Like an Artist, like from Austin Kleon, actually doesn't just come from Austin Kleon. He probably stole it from Pablo Picasso, who at one point said, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." Now, Pablo Picasso might have not been the first one to say this either, because before that, Igor Stravinsky, the famous violin maker, said, "A good composer does not imitate, he steals." Stravinsky might have stolen this from James Joyce, the poet, who said, "Immature artists borrow, mature artists steal," who may have stolen this from Lord Alfred Tennyson, who said, "Great poets imitate and improve, whereas small ones steal and spoil." So perhaps the lesson is not to steal, but instead to hide your sources. All right, lesson number 2. One of the questions that I get a lot, especially from younger designers or newer designers, is, how do I become a great designer? What are the things that I need to learn? Like, what are the fundamentals? Do I need to learn typography? Do I need to learn grid systems? And those are all good guesses and good hypotheses. But what I found is the trick to being a good designer is really to practice design every day. And it doesn't matter what kind. It just matters that you're doing it consistently. One of the great things about Kobe Bryant was that he was an amazing basketball player. But the thing that people knew about him more than just his talent was how much practice he put in, his great work ethic. And so let's take a look at what that actually means. When he was in high school, if you look at this as a chart of Kobe Bryant's typical day from 12 a.m. to 12 a.m., he would go to school for this time period. And he would practice on 2 hours on either side of school. So he'd practice from 5 to 7 a.m. and then he'd practice again from 5 to 7 p.m. So if he was awake from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day, 25% of his day was practice. And he did this constantly for many, many years of his life. And that's what took his talent to the next level. It was more than just talent, is that he put the work ethic in to be able to be really good at this. Some of the common wisdom about being an expert comes from this book, Outliers. It's kind of a famous story written by Malcolm Gladwell. And it comes from this fact. He says, researchers have settled on what they believe is the magic number for true expertise, 10,000 hours, right? So there's this common narrative that if you put 10,000 hours into something, that's where you become an expert. And where practice fits into that, and Malcolm Gladwell kind of outlines this in his book, he says, practice isn't the thing that you do once you're good. It's the thing that you do that makes you good. Right? So it wasn't that Kobe Bryant got to the NBA and then he started practicing 4 hours a day. That's what got him to the NBA, is that he put all the time in before he got good, and that was actually the thing to make him good. So let's see how this applies to design, and expertise. If 10,000 hours gets you expertise, well, what does that look like? Well, if you practice 1 hour a day, it'll take you about 27 years to be an expert. So how do you apply that to you? If you want to be a good graphic designer or a good designer from scratch, if you put 1 hour in a day, and you start when you're 0, by the time you're 27, you will be an expert designer. Now, that seems a little bit daunting that it takes 27 years to build expertise, but let's just look at a couple of multiples of that. If you put in 4 hours a day, you could become an expert in 7 years, right? And that might be something that you can do when you're in college or when you're in school. Being able to put 4 hours a day in, like Kobe Bryant put into basketball, in 7 years, you can become an expert if you're doing that routinely and doing that regularly. What if you put in 8 hours a day? Well, you could become an expert in 3.5 years. So if you think about even if you were brand new to a job and didn't really know much about design, if you're designing for 8 hours a day at that job, in 3.5 years, you would be pretty good. And the thing that gets people to not be pretty good is all the stuff that gets in the way of practice and of design and all those things. If you can focus on designing something every day, 8 hours a day, in 3.5 years, you'll become an expert. All right. The third thing is about portfolios. The third lesson that I've kind of learned in my career that I think is helpful if you're looking for a job is about portfolios. A lot of people design portfolios the same way, and I think it's sad that they do. And so I want to give you what my recommendations are for good portfolios. I think a good portfolio should be a love letter. So I want to show you what that means. Lots of people have portfolios that look like this. Right? They have their logo in the top left corner. They have some kind of menu button in the top right. And then they say something like, hello, I create digital experiences for amazing brands. This is awful. And the reason that this is awful is that as someone who hires, I hire people a lot, I have questions. And I want your portfolio to answer those questions before I even have a chance to ask them. So my biggest question in all of this as someone who hires is, do you have what I need? And when I look at a portfolio, that's the biggest question that I want to answer. I would put money down on the fact that there aren't a lot of hiring managers that think, you know what I need? I really need someone who can create digital experiences for amazing brands. People don't really talk that way. They don't really look for hiring that way. So how could we improve this? If your portfolio looks like that, like this, that's okay. How can we actually move it closer to something that is more valuable and more appealing to hiring managers? Well, let's talk about how to make this incrementally better. I think that a portfolio is a proxy for the first interview. So let's think of this as an interview. As I'm interviewing you, we're not even talking yet. This is the first line of defense in that interview. So when I interview, one of the questions that I often ask first is a softball, because I want the person to succeed as much as they want to succeed too. I want this to be the last interview that I do, because my job is not to interview. My job is to provide direction and to provide creative direction. So I don't want to do 50 interviews. I want the first interview that I do to be a slam dunk, and then I'm happy and this person's happy and I offer them the job and they accept the job, and that's that. So I try to give the first question as a softball because I want it to be easy for someone to answer, rather than trying to trip them up. I don't like when a lot of interviewers try to trip up people, like, oh, that's why they can't work here. That's a terrible practice. Be nice, be kind, root for the person to succeed. So generally, I think the first question should be something easy to answer. So I ask, what do you love to work on? Right? What do you love to do? If all your bills were paid, and what would you do in that case? And I think that everyone should have some answer to that question. It might take a little time to think about that, but I think that answer is an easy one to have at the ready. And I think your portfolio should answer that for you. So rather than this line, I create digital experiences for amazing brands, I prefer seeing stuff like this. I love using Figma to design simple websites. Right? That in itself is much better than the previous one. The previous one was more lofty and ambitious, but it was so vague. This one is much more specific, and it gives me the ability to ask you more questions about this, and it gives you a reason to put things in your portfolio and leave things out of your portfolio. Another good version. I love making posters that make you think. That's great. That's a great thing for me as a hiring manager to see, especially if I'm looking for someone who makes posters and clever posters. So, okay, what else can we do with this? The next question that I ask is much less of a softball. The first one was kind of a warm-up, and this is not a question that I ask to trip people up, but I ask them because it's a hard question and I want to see how they think about it. There's no wrong answer to this, but I kind of want to see how they react to it. So the next question I ask after, what do you love to do? The next question I ask is, what are you the best in the world at? That's a much more difficult question to answer, but I like how people answer that. And I like seeing how people answer that. That tells me a lot about the person that I'm hiring. And I want your portfolio to answer that for me too. So I love making posters that make you think, tell me about what you love. What is the thing that tells me about what you're the best in the world at? Well, maybe it's this. Hello, I do branding and identity. Now, the chances that you are the best in the world at branding and identity is low. How do I know that? Because Michael Beirut is on this call, because Ellen Lupton is on this call, because they're going to be talking later today. And I don't know if they would even say that they're best in the world at that. Some might consider them that. I think I would consider them that. But it's hard for, especially if you're a student, for you to make the claim that you're the best in the world at branding, period. But there are ways to qualify that where it does become more honest. Here, let me show you what that looks like. I do branding and identity for dog owners. Could you be the best in the world at branding and identity for dog owners? Yeah, maybe. You know, Michael Beirut and Pentagram and Collins and all these great, wonderful identity designers and brand designers, they are excellent and the best in the world. But specifically for dog owners, I don't know how many dog owners. And Michael, maybe if you're here, maybe this is something for you to answer. How many dog owner brands have you worked on? There's a chance that a student even, has a portfolio that has done more than some of the people who are most revered and respected in the world at that. You can qualify this even more. I do branding and identity for dog owners in Florida. Now you're narrowing to a point where you literally could be the best in the world. And it is a welcome case to believe. I might actually believe that. You can qualify that as much as you want. I do branding and identity for rescue dog owners in Florida that foster multiple dogs. Now, the problem with narrowing to this level is that might be true, but there might not be enough of a market for this to be a compelling point, right? So how many organizations are there for dog owners, rescue dog owners that foster multiple dogs? Maybe not enough to keep you in business. So there is a level where you can overqualify this, but this is kind of the level that seems appropriate. I do branding and identity for dog owners in Florida. Great. There's probably a great market in Florida of dog owners who want websites or branding or identity, for their dog companies. And so this could be a viable business for you as well as for your clients. All right, so let's talk about a couple of other things. If this is a website, keep your eye on the top of this screen. It probably lives at a URL, right? So this is my website, danmall.me. And so this could be my portfolio on danmall.me. Now, one of the things that I recommend to everyone that has a portfolio, and I get a lot of pushback on this, is I don't think that it's possible to make a portfolio that suits all. Or at least I don't think it's probable. I think it's very tough that one portfolio you make will appeal to every client that you have or every a hiring manager that comes across your site. So what I recommend is, especially for students and people who are getting their first jobs or their first set of jobs, is to make a portfolio for every hiring manager individually. So if you keep your eye on that URL up there, what I recommend is creating a subdomain or a subdirectory that's something like northface.danmall.me. And this will be my portfolio for North Face. And I'll have a different portfolio for Nike and a different portfolio for Advil, or wherever are the places that I want to work. I'll have different portfolios for each of those. That doesn't mean they have to be completely custom and completely different. You can make it a template and you can add the custom things as you need to, and I'll show you what that looks like. But I recommend this as a good practice. I'll give you some more information about that. Now, this kind of shows, this is my North Face portfolio. If you look at the top, this is my Apple portfolio. If you look at the top, this is my Nike portfolio. Now, you'll see that there's a mismatch here. If I'm applying to Nike, if my portfolio said I do branding and identity for dog owners in Florida, what does that have to do with Nike? So I also think that part of a good portfolio is a matchmaking thing where you have to say, again, to the hiring manager, I have the skills that you're looking for. And that hiring manager needs to be able to see that. So if I'm a hiring manager at Nike and I come across this portfolio, I will likely think, this is not a person who, I'm not sure if this person has the skills to apply here. So instead, when you have your custom portfolios, your call to action, your value proposition should reflect who you're actually talking to. So keep an eye on this tagline, I do branding and identity for dog owners. Instead, my portfolio for Nike says, I do branding and identity for sports teams. And now you're starting to create a very specific love letter to someone in particular, right? Which is, for Nike, I want you to know that I do branding and identity for sports teams. Now, maybe you're not the best in the world at doing branding and identity for sports teams, because there are companies and people who specialize in that, and they do, all of the major branding for the major sports teams and sports leagues. But maybe this is better. I do branding and identity for local sports teams. that feels much more believable. Like, yeah, maybe you have done some amazing identity work for your little league, or your community sports team or something like that. And even better, if you're a student, maybe you haven't had those opportunities. You can also, there are value propositions that you can have. So keep your eye on that tagline again. I do branding and identity for local and fictional sports teams, right? That allows you to create, your own sports team and put that in your portfolio as a demonstration of what you can do, even if you haven't had the opportunities to do them quite yet for paying clients. I think that's fair game in a portfolio. I want to know that you have the skills, especially at a junior level, not necessarily the experience. I want to know that you have the skills, and then I, as a hiring manager, can help you build up some of that experience. All right, next thing that we can focus on is I think it's valuable to write a love letter for a specific position. So as we look around the Nike site, maybe we find something like this. Nike has a graphic design internship. And as I scroll down, I kind of see, some of the words here. The intern role is to assist the art director. It's to be involved in projects from beginning to end when possible. So all of the things in here, I should be able to speak to those things in my portfolio. So not only am I applying specifically to a company, but I'm applying specifically for a role, for one specific role there. So here's an example. I'll go back to my portfolio, and it says, I do branding and identity for local and fictional sports teams, but maybe I could sprinkle in some language even from the job description. So maybe it's, I do beginning to end branding and identity for local and fictional sports teams. I'm speaking specifically to that job and to that job description. I'm using some of the language that they have there to match up to what I'm saying I do, to say I have the skills that you're looking for. So now this is starting to turn from a simple generic portfolio that works for everyone into more of a love letter to Nike. So how do we dial that up? Well, you can't really write a love letter to no one in particular, right? And who should this love letter be addressed to? We can't really say like, dear Nike, because who is Nike? Nike's not a person. So let's even look for the person that we're writing to. As I look around LinkedIn, I find Julie Rubio is the design lead at Nike in the Paris City studio, which is where that job description was for us, for the Paris office. So maybe I take my portfolio, and instead of just saying a generic hello, maybe I'm writing this to Julie. Maybe this is a letter to Julie about how much I would love to work with Julie and for Julie on this Nike internship. And what I'm saying here is, this is what I do. And I can be even more specific. Let's look at the end of that sentence. I could say, hi, Julie, I do beginning to end branding and identity for local and fictional sports teams. I would love to work for Nike. And one thing that I learned, and I treat my kids this way, sometimes my kids will say, I'm hungry. And I'll say, okay, do you have a question that you want to ask? And they'll say, oh, Dad, can I have some food? And so what I learned as a kid is that, ask and you shall receive. So we should have a specific request here. The last thing that I want to add to this here is, hi, Julie, I do beginning to end branding for identity and identity for local and fictional sports teams. I'd love to work for Nike. Would you hire me? That's the request that I have for Julie. So that's the thing that I want to show. So now we can start to sprinkle in some other things that make it more apt for Julie to want to hire me for this position. First thing is, I need the work, right? So let's put the work in here. Now the work has to match up to your value proposition, because that introduction is basically saying, here's what I do. And now you have to prove that. You have to back that up, right? So I do beginning to end branding and identity for local and fictional sports teams. As a hiring manager, my next question is, okay, show me. Actually, it's not a question. My next thought is, show me. And that's where the work comes in. The work supports that value statement. Now, what are some of the subconscious things that are maybe would make it more apt for Julie to hire me, or are just fun to actually make? Well, let's make this look like Nike. Let's use Nike orange in here. Rather than using your typeface, let's use Nike's typeface. Give me that Futura extra bold condensed, right? Let's put that in here for how we do this. Then I could even make it more specific. Look at that call to action there, that value proposition. I would love to work for Nike as a graphic design intern in the Paris studio. Would you hire me? Now, one thing that I'm seeing here as a designer is like, the orange, across a lot of the work where I have some fluorescent pinks and blues is like clashing a little bit. So maybe I go with a black on orange or something like that. But this is what a good love letter to someone will look like about your portfolio and about getting a job. Hi, Julie. I do beginning to end branding and identity for local and fictional sports teams. I'd love to work for Nike as a graphic design intern in the Paris studio. Would you hire me? Here is all my work that supports the fact that I can do the stuff that you're looking for. Let's have a conversation. If someone sent this kind of portfolio to me, that would easily get them an interview. That this is something that I wouldn't overlook. That I would put them on the short list to go, this person did their research. They know what they want. They made it the easiest possible way for me to be able to hire them. They took all the work off my plate for having to ask some of the questions that lots of portfolios leave. They answered those questions. I want to talk to this person and I want to hire them. All right, thing number 4 out of 5. A question that I get a lot and talk to a lot of students and even professionals that have been doing this for a long time. How much should I charge? And my general answer is 10%. So let me show you what that means. When people ask, how much should I charge? There's a couple ways to approach this. I'll walk through 3 ways. So approach number 1 is start at 25 bucks an hour. How did I get to that number? I made it up. And the reality of pricing, as we talk about it, is that a lot of numbers are made up because money is abstract. So it's hard to think about that realistically. I'll give you some techniques for doing that in just a minute. But start at 25 bucks an hour. It's a low enough price that lots of clients would hire you at that price. I'll mention some exceptions to that. Especially if a lot of your friends are charging the same amount. So that's how a lot of people figure out what to charge. As they ask a bunch of their friends, they go, how much do you charge? And then they say, oh, 25 bucks an hour, 50 bucks an hour, 100 bucks an hour. And just start doing that just to get a feel for it. This might not have to be your final rate, but you can start here and then see how it goes. So, let's say you're going to make a poster for someone and you think it's going to take 4 hours. You charge them 25 bucks an hour, which is 100 bucks. And then do a couple projects that way, see how it goes. And then change it. If it feels like, oh, I did way more work than it was worth, or that still feels low, double it. Next time you charge something, next time you do a poster, charge 50 bucks an hour instead of 25 bucks an hour. And just do that until clients start to push back. So that's one school of thought on this. I know a lot of people that have been very successful with that methodology, which is let me just start at a point and then every year I'll raise my rates, or every job I'll raise my rates until I get to the point where clients just start pushing back. And so this is a totally viable way to do it. There's nothing wrong with this at all. If you feel comfortable doing that, do that. I teach a lot of different pricing methodologies, but what's common across all of them is use the pricing methodology that you understand. If you understand it, you'll be confident in it. If you don't understand it, no matter how good or bad the methodology is, you'll do a poor job with it because you just don't understand it. So if you get hourly, charge hourly. If you get fixed fees, charge fixed fees. If you get a different way with royalties or commission, do those things, but use what's comfortable to you until you get to the point where it's no longer comfortable, then start to change it. So this is where a lot of people start. Approach number 1. I'll show you a different way. Approach number 2. How much should I charge? Well, when I started out as a designer, I would charge, money was so abstract to me. It was like, what's the difference between 25 bucks and 50 bucks or 25 bucks and 35 bucks? It's so hard. So I just started relegating it to an object. I'll charge enough for a pizza, So if this job paid me a pizza, would I still do it? And if the answer is yes, great, do it for the price of a pizza, 10 bucks or 12 bucks or 15 bucks. If not, though, okay, maybe I need something more expensive than a pizza. So if the client paid me in an object, would I take the job? That's part of the mental model of this approach. So not a pizza, okay. How about a new camera? All right. And I've had projects where in the past where I thought about them as, this is my new camera project. This is my pizza project. This is my travel with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. We had so many trips because I took freelance gigs as oh, this is going to be our Bermuda cruise project. This is going to be our Belize getaway project. And I call this object value pricing. Because money is so abstract and objects are much more tangible. And I still use this method to this day. I run an agency. We price very complicated things sometimes, but sometimes it's easier to just relegate it to something that is less abstract and something very tangible. What do I get if we do this project? Basically enough to pay for a Toyota Corolla in cash. Cool. Yeah, we'll do it for that. Or no, it doesn't feel like it's going to be worth it for that. That's a helpful mental model for a lot of people to think about. What object encompasses the value of this. I have a beginner level class on Skillshare about design systems. And based on Skillshare's royalty that they pay every month, I get about 500 bucks a month, which is pretty good. It's hard to think about this like a $500 a month thing. So I think of this differently. What do I do with this income? I buy sneakers. I love Jordan 1s, Prestos, Air Max 90s. I have the Chicago Black Toes. I have the Black Amarillo Team Oranges. I have the Racer Pink acronyms. I have Top 3s. I have Special Air Force 1s. I have, the Flynet Racer Be True. You get the idea. I don't think of this as, oh, this is my Skillshare class. I think of it as my sneaker fund. That's the object value pricing for it. And once you get the hang of it, of this, then you're ready for a third, more complex approach that it is more complex. It could get you better business and it could position you better, but it's more complex. So until you're comfortable mastering something like this, then maybe, think about doing that with having more practice on that. So here's the third thing. The third thing is, when faced with the question, how much should I charge? The first two approaches were answers to that. It was like, oh, I should charge for the pizza, or I should charge $25 an hour. Instead, you're going to answer a question with a question, which is, well, what does the customer get? What happens for them if you do the work and you're successful? And a very helpful question here is, what's the difference if you do the work and if you don't? Right? So let's say a client was trying to hire you to make a poster for a gig that they're playing. Well, what happens if you don't make the poster for them? Well, and you can ask the client that question. Well, what happens if you don't have a poster? And they say, well, if we don't have a poster, we're definitely not going to sell at the venue. And then the next question is like, oh, well, what if you do sell at the venue? How much do you get? And they say, oh, well, if we sell at the venue, they'll pay us $8,000 because that's the sellout price that this venue would charge. Right? Okay, cool. So then you say, I'll do it for 10%. The client pays $800 to you, $8,000 back. That is a 900% return on investment. That's 75 times better investment than the average stock market return. That is what you're delivering to your customers. If you can deliver that, if you can deliver 75 times better than the stock market, if you can deliver that, a 900% ROI, then you can command whatever rate you want. I usually start at 10%, and it becomes a negotiation because some clients say, oh, I don't think 10% is a good investment. Would you do 5? And then it would be up to you to do that. Right? And so this is the model that we use all the time in pricing is, what do we get the customer? What do we get the client? And if they get that, what of that seems like an appropriate return for us, an appropriate commission for us? And the cool way of doing that this way is that it doesn't matter how long it takes you, right? You might assume, oh, it's going to take 4 hours, to make this poster. But could you do it in 2? How about 1 hour? Could you do it in 1 hour? If you could do it in an hour, you're effectively making $800 an hour, and the client doesn't care because you never talk to them about your hourly rate. You talk to them about something way more important than how long it's going to take you. You talk to them the whole time about what's in it for them. And this is really the key to pricing. The key to making a lot of money without objections is keeping the customer focused on what's in it for them, not as a distraction, right? You want to talk about it honestly and transparently, but really what you're talking to them about is how invested you are in their success. The most successful pricing methodologies that I've found are win-win. If they win, then you win. And it keeps them focused on what they're already focused on, which is winning. And it frames all of your work solely through the desire to help them win. Not how long it's going to take you, not what materials you need, not what the copy is going to be, but about how you can help them be successful in the thing that they're hiring you to do in the first place. This is the approach that I describe in detail in my book. It's called Pricing Design. It's 10 pages. It's it's $10, 50 pages long. You can read it during a particularly vigorous restroom trip. All right, last one that I'll mention, 5 out of 5 here. Dream projects are about the people, not the work. This is a thing that took me a long time to learn. Now that I learn it, I look for it. When someone tells you about a new project, a new freelance project or something, what's the first thing that we generally ask about? Well, we ask about budget and timeline, right? Typically, that's what we do. And when we start out, as new designers, or maybe you're in school, the way that you charge clients is you do it this way, right? Like you do a bunch of stuff for free, and the timeline is always as soon as you can get it done. A lot of our careers start here doing projects for free and quickly. I started in a slightly better place than this. My first project ever was I built a website for the Philadelphia Metro Initiative in 1998. And I was younger than I am now. It was a nonprofit related to my church, and they paid me $200, which meant that from my first gig ever, I was a professional designer. Now, that doesn't mean that I was a good professional designer. There's a difference between those, but I was a professional designer from my first gig. And then over time, as I grew in my craft, I got projects that paid more and had more reasonable timelines. I've done projects for $1,500 for 2 weeks. And then over time, a $12,000 project, for 8 weeks. But no matter how high that project budget goes, and those of you who are professionals that have been working for a long time, this is to be true. There's always something that feels constrained, right? In the words of the immortal notorious B.I.G., more money, more problems. And so if you think that it's just a little bit more cash or a little bit more time makes the project ideal, well, I was really lucky in that one time in my work life, I got the fabled dream project, the unicorn project. We got a client that said we could take as much time as we needed, and we got to name our price. Right? This was it. This was the dream project. It was one of the worst projects I've ever worked on. As a team, we could not agree on anything. There was no brief, right? It was so open. So we were arguing about like, what are we going to do? And we ended up creating something that no one really cared about. It was just a bad project. And it really dashed my dreams that like, this was the thing I was waiting for, like unlimited budget, unlimited time frame. I thought we would never get it. And here we are, we got it. And then it wasn't the formula. So as I mentioned before, I've been working for 22 years as a designer, and I am fortunate to say that I have worked on dream projects. This is not the formula. I know what the formula looks like now. This isn't the one. I want to show you a couple of formulas. We did some work for ESPN in 2013 to announce the return of their famous documentary line, 30 for 30. I love the 30 for 30 documentaries. I knew of them before we had this project. So this was a dream client and a dream project in terms of the brief. And what they did was they hired us to build a teaser site to announce the return. So I called my good friend, Jamie, and he was working as a tech director at an agency at the time. And he was all in. He was like, yeah, let's do this. He didn't really freelance at all. So this was kind of like his first time freelancing. He never had to freelance because he had good jobs at agencies. But he said, like, this sounds like a cool project. I love ESPN. I'm into 30 for 30. Let's do this. We made a rough sketch. This is like 30 seconds for what we thought the site could be. The content of the series for 30 for 30, anybody who hasn't seen it, it was amazing. And so we thought, let's just make the site the content. There is nothing more needed. We don't need to make fancy UI or anything like that. So we just drew this sketch together really quickly. And I think we did this in Paint, maybe, I don't know. And then we got to work. So what we ended up doing was we made this giant sprite sheet of the frames and the announcement trailer, and we created a custom video player. This was the site. The whole site was like a custom video player where you could drag anywhere on the site to fast forward or rewind and like see the history of 30 for 30. Now, the thing is, I didn't remember any of this stuff, any of this work. I didn't remember any of it until I pulled it up for this talk. So as I was putting together, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot we made that. Oh yeah, I forgot we made that. All of those details disappear over time. Maybe it's because I have a bad memory, but this was a project that was 7 years ago, 8 years ago. I've worked on hundreds of projects since then. It just doesn't stick in my memory. But here's the stuff that I did remember. My friend Jamie, during this project, I remember him sending me a message that said like, hey, I'm going to be late to today's meeting because I have bed bugs. I'm like, oh, geez. And it was a big deal in his life that he got bed bugs. Like he had to turn up his whole apartment and everything. And then a week after that, after he got that all treated, I got another message from him saying like, I have 104-degree fever. Right, so it wasn't just bed bugs. He got really sick during it. And I remember these things. I also remember that every day, even throughout these things, he would send me a message that said, I'm having the time of my life. Despite all those things, he would message me and say, I'm having the time of my life. After the project was over, he said to me, I forgot how exciting projects could be. And he quit his full-time job and he opened up his own agency and ran that for a few years. And that's the kind of stuff that makes a dream project. Not the budget, not the timeline, it's the people and what they get out of it. Honestly, I don't remember how long the project was anymore. I don't remember the project budget. I don't think it was a lot. This is the stuff that sticks with me. And I think sticks with a lot of people in how they do their work is the people that they work with and the journeys that they go on with them. I used to work at an agency called HappyCog. I helped open the Philadelphia office of HappyCog. And the way that we used to do design work for clients is that we would do 3 different directions for every client, and each of those directions was done by a different designer. And whomever's direction the client chose, they became the project lead and then kind of did the rest of the work with the other people assisting them. I was lucky to work with these 2 guys, really great, wonderful designers, Jason Santa Maria and Rob Weichert. I learned so much from them early on in my career. When I was an intern, they were my first art directors and creative directors. And I remember working on a project at HappyCog. We were working for making a new website for Krylon, the spray paint company. And we were the 3 people on the work. So, each of us did our own directions. So I did my comp. This was my comp for the new site. And then Jason did his comp for the new site. And then Rob did his comp for the new site. And the client chose mine. And I was terrified. This was the first time this ever happened. I was a mid-level designer or junior level designer. My comp never got picked. I was the junior one. What would Jason and Rob do? Like, they were more senior. What would they say? Are they going to be mad at me? Are they going to be bitter? Did I just ruin my chances of getting promoted or getting mentored? Like, I don't know how they were going to deal with this. And what they did was they congratulated me, and they said things to me like, the client picked the best version. And they said, ours weren't nearly as good as yours. Now, I think they were lying a little bit, But the fact that they would say that to me, like, do you know how much confidence that gave me for the rest of my career? Like, I'm still riding that confidence high that people that I admired, that my bosses, my mentors, my design heroes, they were rooting for me. That's the kind of stuff that makes a dream project. Not the budget, not the timeline, it's the people. I don't remember how much we got paid for this. I don't remember how long it took. It could have taken 6 weeks. It could have taken 6 months. I don't remember. I was on a high on that project because people that I admired and people who I relied on to teach me had confidence in me that I was doing good work there. At one point, I worked on the redesign of Crayola, Crayola.com, which was awesome. The client was amazing. It's Crayola, like I had such a childhood attachment to the brand. So that's really cool. This was the team that was working on this project. And one of the things that we did was, and we still do, is we sit down at the beginning of the project and we ask each person individually, what would you like to do on this project? And so our producer, Saba, she went first and she said, I'd like to illustrate on this project. We're working for Crayola. There's probably going to be some illustrations. And Saba goes, I'd like to do the illustrations. Now, we had on our team Ayaka Ito. For those of you who don't know her, she is an amazing graphic designer, illustrator, type designer, really, really good at illustration. So we all just kind of assumed it's Crayola, Ayaka's on our team, she's going to do the illustrations. And so when Saba says, I'd like to do the illustrations, we're like, oh, well, Ayaka, what are you going to do then? And Ayaka says, as the designer, she goes, I'd like to learn to write some code on this project. Like, okay, so Stacy, senior developer, well, Stacy, what do you want to do then? She's like, well, Stacy's worked on all Flash projects her whole life, never worked on anything with HTML, CSS up to that point. She said, well, I'd like to learn how to write better HTML, CSS. Our senior developer on the project is like, I'd like to be kind of a junior person on it. Okay. And then Abel in the top right, he said, well, I'd like to try and lead it. That was my job to do as a design director, but our senior designer was like, I'd like to try my hand at leading a project. Okay, well, George, how about you? In the bottom right corner, well, George, our developer intern, was like, well, I'd like to improve my design skills. And, for me, I'm like, all right, well, I guess that leaves me I'll write the copy. So if you look at this, none of the people that have specific roles were doing things related to their roles. Our designers were coding, our producer was illustrating, our designer was leading, our design director was writing copy. Like, it was just all backwards. And when I think about the projects that I am most fond of, the pattern is the people. When we enjoy working together, when everyone's learning, pushing, playing, those are my favorite projects. It has nothing to do with the budget, the client, the timeline, none of that stuff. If there's a lesson that I can leave you with, it's this one. It's to enjoy the people that you work with. At the beginning of every project, ask everyone, including yourself, what do you want to get out of this project, right? And then make it your mission to help someone else achieve that. If you're working with a team, make it your mission to help them achieve that. If it's just you and the client, well, ask your client, what would you like to do on this project? And make it your mission to help them achieve that. And then they will make it their mission to help you achieve yours as well. All right, we'll do a bonus round and then we'll kind of close up here for some Q&A stuff. I'll show you some work that just didn't make the cut, like some stuff that no one's ever going to see. We did some work for a company called Grovo, and they do learning management and micro learning. And this is one of the early comps that we did for them. And they looked at it and they said, like, this is nice, but like, I don't know, could we make it more fun? Like, more fun? Yeah, sure, that's a good request, but like, how do we make this more fun? And one of the designers in the studio had just bought some cake mix because I guess he had he had to make a cake for his wife or his daughter, I don't know, something, when he got home. So it's a cake mix on his desk, and it's this funfetti cake mix. And so, one of us had the bright idea that what if we sprinkled some funfetti all over the site? And literally we just started to sprinkle like confetti into the user interface. And, and this is kind of how it manifested. If we scroll down here, to the bottom of this page, we have, I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but little dots as like funfetti. And we're like, is that fun, I guess? And we showed it to the client. Nothing else really changed. We showed it to the client. We're like, here you go. It's a more fun version. They're like, yes, this is awesome. So, when in doubt, if you want to add more fun, just sprinkle a little funfetti on it. That's a good design trick to have in your belt. Here are some logos that just never made the cut. Just not approved by clients. The client went another direction, but we really like these. So some logos that will never see the light of day other than this meeting here. We worked on a really fun project. There was a furniture designer who figured out a way to make custom furniture at any size at the same cost. So if you want like a 46-inch sofa or like a 96-inch long sofa, those are relatively the same price. The problem was that he was in San Francisco, and so real estate for a showroom was really hard to come by. So he had this idea that, like, what if people were to browse furniture on a kiosk on like an iPad? And then if you look at that button in the bottom left corner, the try a sofa, that would then activate a 10,000-pound robot arm to go and grab the sofas that were mounted on the wall and then pick them up and put them in front of you so that you can try them. You can sit in them. And then once you sat in them, if you want to try something else, you could touch another thing on the iPad, and then this robot arm would come and bring you the next sofa. This actually did come to fruition. Here's a video of this actual robot arm moving sofas around. So pretty cool. I got to work on a project with a 10,000-pound robot arm. I think in every designer's life, you probably have to work on a weather app at some point. We worked on a weather app, which was called Relative Weather. And all it did was show you the weather as compared to yesterday. So today, 6 degrees colder than yesterday. We submitted to the App Store. They rejected it. They were like, this is way too simple, and you all are dummies. Please come up with a better app. So this will never see the light of day. Last one that I'll share. We did some work for the Cosmopolitan of Las Vegas, which is a hotel casino resort in Vegas. In order to make a great site for them, we had to understand all the different audience types, right? Like, that's what you do when you make a website, from people who come to the resort for the food or for the rooms because they're staying or for the gambling. And one particular audience that we knew we had to cater to well was the high roller crowd. In order to get to know them well, our clients at the Cosmopolitan had an idea. They said, why don't we give you around $10,000 in cash so that you can play a few hands at the high rollers table? You know what they say? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. And I think we'll do some Q&A now.
Thanks so much, Dan, for that presentation and so much knowledge that you've shared, from portfolios as love letters to pricing and all of that. And thank you, everybody, for posting your questions. Unfortunately, we're running a few minutes behind, so I'm just going to synthesize some questions around this idea of portfolio as love letter. And so what happens if you're trying to get a divorce from your old discipline or your old work and switch careers? How do you write a love letter to that?
Yeah, so that was my experience. I actually started as a developer. And what I found was, as a developer, I wasn't in a lot of the conversations that I wanted to be in. You know, like, by the time a project got to me, all the decisions were made. Like, I had ideas, I wanted to brainstorm, but it's like, no, you just need to build what the designer came up with. So I was like, well, I need to learn how to be a designer then, if I need to be in those conversations. And what I did was I took my portfolio down for a year and I just did design work. So I spent a year investing in a new career, and I was just taking as much design work as I could, free projects for my family or my weird uncle, you know, like projects that my church had, or like I made up my own projects just so I could put up a design portfolio that said I'm a designer, as opposed to my previous portfolio that said I'm a developer. So all the good work that I had as a developer, I had to take down. That's part of the sacrifice in order to be able to say I'm a designer.
So on that topic of sacrifice and giving up being a developer, another theme that I was seeing is, to continue on this love letter theme, like folks who are maybe a little promiscuous with their love, or maybe professionally polyamorous. Like, how do you deal with different portfolios that way? And then kind of relating it to another question, you showed that example of like the Nike portfolio, which you used their font and made it orange. Like, are you suggesting that folks create a different portfolio for every job they apply to?
I am, and that doesn't mean that it has to be custom every time, right? It could be as simple as replacing the text in the banner, you know, every time, and then the work stays the same. So I've seen versions of that before. In terms of the it's interesting, the promiscuity of all of that. I had someone who applied to SuperFriendly who did that, right? And they wrote a love letter to me and said, like, this is what I love about SuperFriendly. This is what I would like to do on projects. And his portfolio was on GitHub. So there's a link at the bottom that said, like, it's on GitHub. So I looked at the GitHub link and I looked at the source files and I looked at his clients folder, and it showed me all of the other clients that he sent the same exact thing to. There were 12 others in there. But it had the opposite impression on me. It wasn't like, oh man, I feel betrayed now because he sent the same letter. It gave me even more of a reason to want to hire him. I'm like, this dude did 12 portfolios. Like, he's not afraid of doing the work. He's not afraid of putting the work in to be able to do this. So for me, it has the opposite effect. I think I've seen hiring managers have that. Like, they're more impressed by the work knowing that you did that because you put the time in to do that. Like, not only did you make one portfolio and call it a day, you made 12. It seems like that's how much you want this. And I think that reflects really positively for the person that's looking for the job.
Thanks. And we have time for one more. It was a clarifying question about that part where you're talking about stealing and tracing. Did you mean that in a literal sense of like using a pen or a pencil, or is there a specific tool that you suggest for that?
Yeah, when it comes to UI design, I mean literally tracing. So the way that I do it and the way that I teach my apprentices or my design students is take a screenshot of what you're trying to copy, paste it into whatever artboard or thing that you're using, Figma or Sketch or Photoshop or whatever. Literally trace. And then the key is don't stop there, right? Remove your source, but then don't stop there. After you imitate, after you do the tracing, then remix, then start to invent some of your own stuff based on that. But start by literally tracing, because there's things that you can learn by copying someone else's work pixel for pixel. Especially as you do it over time, you start to realize, oh, this person always uses 25 pixels between the header and the subhead. Like, you start to learn some of those things by the imitation. And if you do just one of them, you don't really learn that. And if you try to approximate it on your own, you'll find that you'll go to your own vices rather than trying to learn somebody else's bag of tricks. So instead of like just trying to eyeball it and go, yeah, I'll do my own version of that, literally trace, because you'll find things about like, oh, I didn't realize, like, I normally use point sizes below 48 pixels, but this person is using 128, point size on this headline. I didn't even know that you could use type that's that big. So you start to learn some of those lessons when you trace, and it's harder to learn when you don't trace.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you everyone for the chat, which looks like it's really blowing up right now. So we're going to take a quick break for Dan and others to grab a water, a snack, bio break, whatever that is. We'll come back a little bit after 1 o'clock Eastern time. We'll meet our reviewees, and hopefully we can weave in some of these other questions as part of the portfolio reviews as well.